You might make a start. Good afternoon, everybody. It's right on time, and because it's such an interesting discussion with a fantastic panel, we're going to make a start that's bang on time. I am Fiona Caniglia from Queensland Shelter, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Time to Deliver Housing Responses to Support Young People. I'd like to acknowledge that this conference and this session is being held on the traditional lands of the Noongar people. I would also like to acknowledge the people who have lived experience of housing vulnerability who are at the conference either as presenters or as delegates. Your experiences play an absolutely vital role in shaping better housing outcomes for the future, and thanks to Mission Australia, the sponsored delegate partner, I am myself delighted to see around the nation that more and more lived experience roles embedded in the organisations that are seeking to deliver the much needed services. And I can only imagine that this will be something that becomes stronger, better, and certainly better resourced as we move forward. I have a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get a few opening remarks, and then we'll get right into it. Today we're going to hear 4 presentations of about 10 minutes each, which will be followed by a panel discussion where we will be taking questions from the audience. So in that sense, it would be wonderful if you could be jotting down some really great questions and we can field them over here with the panel. I'll provide a little bit more information about how to ask questions later on. And for this session, we'd just like to ask that photos aren't taken of presenters to share on social media during the conference from this particular session. So the presenters today in this order are Lisa Dalla-Zuanna and Atlas from Melbourne City Mission, Kate Davis from Murdoch University, Sonia Sheppard and Blake Oster from Junction, Australia, and Corin, Moffatt and Avie from the Foyer Foundation. Just in the preparation for this session, it's already been a rich discussion, even though we spent very little time together. But you're all here, I'm sure, because you know and care deeply about the fact that young people experience significant structural barriers to realising their right to a home. Housing options, particularly now, are so limited, incomes are too low, along with competition in a rental market with people who have rental histories, transitions from care and institutional settings that just add trauma and harm. When young people experience evictions from social housing, it's an adverse childhood experience that causes significant trauma, and it also impacts their developmental stages and progress. It can have a catastrophic trajectory for later life. So we want to really be centred in our collective care and concern about the trajectories of young people towards housing futures in which they have rights, in which they have real homes, and in which they flourish and contribute in every single way they want to. So on that note, I'd like to invite our first speakers, Lisa Dalla-Zuanna and Atlas from Melbourne City Mission.
Hi everyone. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that we're meeting on First Nations land. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge that this land was stolen, was never ceded. As Fiona said, I'm Atlas. I'm a lived experience advisor, which is maybe a term that you're familiar with. But if you aren't, it just means that I'm someone who has experience of trying to navigate the systems I advocate in as a service user. I spent most of my teens and half of my 20s in homelessness. I had to leave my family home because of violence, which is an experience shared by 80% of young people in homelessness. There was nowhere for me to go after I left. I spent years couch surfing with strangers and sleeping on the street and in crisis accommodation while I applied for every housing opportunity that came up. I tried to access private rentals, but I couldn't even afford to rent a room on youth allowance. And when applying for social housing, I was turned down again and again. My housing worker told me I would have a better chance if I was on the disability pension or if I had NDIS. On youth allowance, I was getting 50% less than someone on DSP and 30% less than someone on job seeker. The housing providers have to make their services viable to keep them running, paying back loans and covering maintenance, which means taking in renters who pay more rent. I understand the system, but that doesn't mean it isn't broken. The lower rate of youth allowance is a discriminatory policy that is keeping young people on the streets. After I spent months proving to Centrelink that I was abused by my parents and I received no financial support from anyone in my life, I was still paid less just because I was younger. The housing system we have now puts people like me at a disadvantage, and that disadvantage puts lives at risk. We recognize that young people have different access needs in other systems, like physical and mental health, family violence, and even in homelessness, but we don't have a separate housing system. When young people are trying to access social housing, they are being assessed next to people who have higher government support payments, higher minimum wage, more rental experience, more established support networks, or at least the idea that they are more capable of managing their needs and sustaining a tenancy. And I think it's important to acknowledge that no one is born with the information. When you enter homelessness young and you don't have anyone to teach you, this isn't a capacity question. Young people aren't inherently less capable of succeeding. We just aren't giving them the tools. That's why we created Home Time. 18 months ago, we created a coalition-based advocacy campaign that centers lived experience voices in the fight to end youth homelessness. We are proud to be supported by frontline services, peak bodies, unions, industry, and thousands of individual supporters. And in the first year, we grew our coalition to over 200 services who are committed to ending youth homelessness. I'm going to pass over to Lisa, who will give you a more in-depth look at the Home Time campaign.
Just before I start talking about Home Time, I just want to say what a privilege it is to stand alongside Atlas and be allowed into his life and actually hear how hard it is for young people. MCM housing was created out of the injustice that young people face when they look for housing, and from that the Home Time campaign has grown. And the Home Time campaign has been remarkable, and the work that the team has done advocating for 15,000 homes for young people nationally, which really is just a first step to getting some of the young people in our country housed. Also advocating for an increase in the youth allowance, job seeker, particularly youth allowance for the young people to have the ability to pay for more than a room, but also pay the rent for a home, and allow organisations like MCM Housing and all the providers that are represented here to actually be able to put young people into the safety of a home. Young people that find it unreasonable to live at home need to go into Centrelink, prove that it is unreasonable to live at home, and they're placed on a $90 a week rental basis through youth allowance, which is 25% of what they've paid as a total by the government. $90 comes to us, and that doesn't even meet the threshold for them then to be able to access Commonwealth Rental Assistance, CRA. So it not only makes it difficult for housing providers to house them, but it makes it impossible for them to live, and impossible to find a private rental or rental anywhere. Hence the reason that we need to focus and get something done about that, coming up to a higher standard and at least meet the income that adults receive in the statutory incomes. The other thing that Home Time is pushing for strongly, and I'm talking to a room full of believers, is the need for support for young people while they are in the housing. They need the wraparound support to help them achieve success in their tenancies and lead them to what they see as wanting their life to look like. Nothing becomes easy until you have a roof over your head and some sense of security. And the Home Time campaign is shouting out loudly to government, to everyone that will listen, to everyone in this room, to start advocating for young people to be housed, and housed in a way that is safe and secure, and leave them with money to live. I'm going to hand back to Atlas to talk about the huge successes that Home Time has made, and I would ask everybody, as Atlas will, to go out and sign your name to the Home Time campaign and help us make a difference in the advocacy that's being done.
So thank you, Lisa. Lisa did a really great job of summarising our goals for the Home Time campaign, but in the last 18 months, we've had some really incredible successes that I'd like to share with you. Now, as part of our advocacy, we're committed to developing a really strong research base with policy submissions and a youth housing design guide developed. We've also commissioned 2 separate analyses from the University of New South Wales City Future Research Centre and the University of Sydney, outlining the financial barriers and evidence-based solutions to young people on youth allowance being allocated social housing. Earlier this year, the Home Time campaign also supported a delegation of lived experience advisors to travel to Parliament House in Canberra to meet face-to-face with MPs, sharing the results of the studies we commissioned and our stories, and a vision for a future where young people have access to safe and stable housing. Home Time representatives have been working with key housing and finance MPs over the last 18 months. These conversations and the strong advocacy from the Home Time team played a critical role in the federal government's recent decision to allocate $1 billion in housing investments, with $700 million dedicated to grants for youth and victim survivors housing, targeting youth and women and children escaping family violence. Home Time has also played a critical role in securing the federal government's rapid review into youth homelessness, which is underway. There's so much more that we've been doing and will continue to do, hopefully, with your support. And if you want to know more about the Home Time campaign, we have a booth here. You can come visit us. We're friendly. We have Lego houses. You can build a home for Home Time. Sign up to the campaign. There's a QR code on our postcards, or you can go to hometime.org.au. And to finish up, I want to share with you a video that we made as part of our campaign. If I can work the computer. Nope.
No.
Nope.
I'd offer to help, but that would be a waste of time.
It should get you out of it. And then if you click on your name, it should play yours. Click yes. There you go.
Did it. Thank you. Home should mean that you are safe at the end of the day. When I was young, home had always been a place of fear and anger.
It felt like I was walking on eggshells. So there was this constant fear in the back of my mind as an Indigenous woman, having to move completely to the other side of the state, away from everything, was super hard. Until you're a kid living in a situation where you're trying to find your next meal and your next place to stay, I think you will never understand how hard it actually is. There was a lot of times where I slept in the streets, parks, train stations, and especially being a young woman, it's really confronting and really scary.
I was left in a position where I had to make a decision if it's safer to go home with a stranger or sleep on the street or go to that crisis accommodation. I was a child, and I made decisions that no child should have to, knowing that there was no system built around me, built around young people, built around queer people, and built around trans people. It felt hopeless.
Tens of thousands of young people are turning up alone to homelessness services across Australia every year in need of help. We're calling on federal, state and territory governments to provide 15,000 homes with support for young people across Australia.
The Home Time campaign means hope to me.
I always say I wish I could give that girl a hug and tell her that she'll make it out on the other side, because she didn't think she'd survive, but we did.
Thank you both so much, and the call to action, there's something you can do today, and perhaps also share this opportunity with others in your networks. I'd like to welcome Kate Davis from Murdoch University.
Hi everyone. I too would like to acknowledge that we are on Wodjaknunga Budja, and that after 60,000 years of custodianship of this land, it is a real injustice that Aboriginal people are far too heavily represented within homelessness and housing insecurity, and it's something that I hope we can all commit to addressing. So I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective. I've worked as a lawyer within Tenancy WA, so the equivalent of tenant unions in other states, and we kept facing the problem of families with children being evicted from public housing in Western Australia. And so I took that to Murdoch and have almost completed a PhD looking at whether it is lawful to evict children to homelessness from public housing in Western Australia. That research project has been a partnership with the Nullit-Kulunga Nullit Court research team, Our Children, Our Heart research team at the Telethon Kids Institute, where there are 7 Noongar elders who are researchers there. Nullit-Kulunga Nullit Court is an early childhood development research program that held really large consultations across the Perth area, looking at what's needed for kids, Kulunga, to grow up strong here. And they had big meetings of elders, like meetings of 80 elders looking at what's needed. And there are over 100 elders in the program. And so the 7 who are the co-researchers are accountable to the community. And there were 3 priorities. 1, secure housing. Another, a safe child protection system, and thirdly, inclusive early childhood education. So my work has been working in partnership with the Nullit-Kulunga Nullit Court program around addressing the safe housing part. So the first challenge was to try to identify what is the extent of the eviction of children from public housing, because it wasn't data that was available on the public record. It wasn't data in annual reports or anywhere. And so what we found from the research was, over an 8-year period in WA, 3,451 children evicted from public housing. So they're primarily evicted when their whole family is evicted from public housing, so not necessarily children on their own. And I say children rather than young people because this includes a whole range of children from infants to 18 years old. The other reality that we were able to quantify in the data is that 54% of all evictions from public housing in Western Australia are Aboriginal households. So as part of the research, because I'm a lawyer doing a law PhD, has been to undertake strategic litigation. So we worked with the lead applicants, the Abraham family, for a class action race discrimination complaint against the Housing Authority through the Australian Human Rights Commission, in partly addressing that kind of statistic. And we also ran 2 Supreme Court challenges around administrative law, arguing denial of procedural fairness and unreasonableness in Housing Authority decisions. That one is still going on appeal to the Court of Appeal. But this research is looking at some national comparisons around the evictions of children from public housing. And my thanks to Dr. Alastair Sisson from Macquarie University, who's done a lot of work to get this data. So I'd like to start with a little bit of myth busting. This is, for those of you who are not from WA, our former Premier Mark McGowan, who, despite having a thumping majority, an absolute majority in both houses of Parliament, our opposition was reduced to a tiny handful of seats. He still felt the need to stigmatise public housing and treat public housing tenants as a political football. Defending his government's decisions to knock down major public housing towers without having any replacements available. He tried to blame public housing tenants for being drug dealers operating out of ghettos. So this was a front page of our West Australian newspaper. And so I wanted to do some myth busting because there is so much stigmatisation of social housing tenancies. Evictions, this is just in Western Australia, over I think it's a 9-year period there. Evictions for illegal use of premises, which would include the apparent drug dealing, is only 2% of all evictions, so 95 evictions over that 9-year period. There's also a kind of myth that disruptive behaviour is the leading cause of evictions, and that's why people are evicted from public housing. Again, it's just not borne out by the data. 12% of evictions in WA from public housing are for our 3 strikes or disruptive behaviour evictions. The leading cause of evictions there is arrears, and that can include charges for damage to the property as well, but it's financial. The leading cause of eviction from public housing in Western Australia is poverty. The next one that you'll see at the bottom is one that most of you from other states won't experience. Ours, there is 37% of evictions are for end of fixed term, which is a without grounds termination in public housing. It's my understanding that Western Australia is the only government that uses without grounds terminations against public housing tenants, and ours has really been on the rise. And given the earlier statistic, you won't be surprised to hear that Aboriginal people are disproportionately represented in that group as well, with 58% of all fixed term tenancies within public housing being for Aboriginal families. So, a whole wall of numbers for you. This is, at this stage we have a growing amount of data about the eviction of children nationally, but so far only WA and New South Wales that we have where we can do an apples with apples kind of comparison. So, to start with, the numbers at the bottom show the number of tenancies that are managed by the Housing Authority in WA and in New South Wales. So 30,900 properties in WA, 96,600 in New South Wales. The figures in New South Wales include mainstream public housing and the Aboriginal Housing Office. In Western Australia, the decision was taken some years ago to disband the Aboriginal Housing Office, and it's all just delivered mainstream. So one of the first things we can see is if we look at the rates of Aboriginal eviction. In Western Australia, the 26% of public housing tenancies have Aboriginal people in their household, but 54% of all evictions are Aboriginal families. Whereas in New South Wales, we have 14% of the public housing tenancies are for Aboriginal households, and 15% of the evictions are Aboriginal households. So that incredible disparity, the incredible disproportionate rate of evictions for Aboriginal families in Western Australia is just not apparent in New South Wales. There is a really significant problem with that in WA. Okay. So the next point that I wanted to make with this data is about the numbers of children evicted. So that's on the right-hand column, a total of 3,451 evicted in Western Australia, and then in New South Wales, a total of 1,933. So even though New South Wales is managing 3 times the number of tenancies, Western Australia is evicting more children from public housing. So WA is evicting children from public housing 4 times the rate of New South Wales. WA is evicting Aboriginal households at 5 times the rate of New South Wales, and WA is terminating public housing tenancies altogether at nearly double, 1.8 times the rate of New South Wales. As part of the work we've been doing, we've been looking at some elder-led development of solutions, and part of that is around having support services that recognise the central role of intergenerational trauma in the underlying issues that might lead to complaints or disruption, and indeed that lead to the overcrowding from the extremely high rate of homelessness we see, particularly in Western Australia, for the Aboriginal community. Elders are really clear about calling for having an option for support services to be delivered by Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. And we're really looking at trying to have roundtable case management for families in crisis facing eviction, because the challenges that tenants are facing is not a lack of knowledge about how to manage a budget, it's not a lack of knowledge about how to pay rent on time or what are the tenancy expectations. The challenges are deeply entrenched crisis with tenants facing far more difficulties than I or many of the other people in the Housing Authority have ever faced. And so what's needed is actual support for people to be able to address those challenges. Here is Barbara Abraham, who has driven with her spirit and her diplomacy the class action race discrimination complaint. And she says, "I worry my grandkids are headed for prison or death. No one should have to go through what we've been through. Barbara is a great-grandmother now. She and her husband have been homeless for over 14 years with the care of grandchildren through that time. They applied for housing every 2 years and were rejected for public housing at each stage. She is now housed as a result of that litigation, but no one should have to sue their own state government to get housing. Thank you.
I just have to say a sincere thanks to the speakers. They've each so far kept to time, and it's really hard when these topics are wide and deep and enriching to hear from a data-driven perspective the scale of a particular problem in order to be able to solve it. We're going to hear now from Sonia Sheppard and Blake Oster from Junction, Australia.
You ready?
Yep.
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm Sonia. I'm from Junction, Australia. We are a Tier 1 community housing provider based in Adelaide.
And I'm Blake. I'm a proud Palawa man, and I've been a resident of the Multara Tiny Homes for almost a year now.
So, yeah, as mentioned, we're here to do a presentation on Multara Tiny Homes campus. This is a project that's really close to our hearts. It is based in the southern suburbs of Adelaide. Junction invested $3 million into this project with no funding from government. So for us, it's just not about the bricks and the mortar. It's about creating a different kind of pathway for young people, a place that balances independence with support and recognises the dignity and strength in each person. We developed this to respond to a gap we saw, and more importantly, to reflect the kind of community we believe in, one where young people are seen, supported and set up to thrive.
I've been in residential care since I was 10 due to homelessness and domestic violence, and I transitioned into independent living at 16. When I was introduced to independent living, my one goal for a home was having it close to school, and the Multara Tiny Homes best suited my requirements. When I arrived at Tiny Homes, I became familiar with the campus, where there are 10 identical pods, which are all fully furnished with a bedroom, kitchen and bathroom. However, it is a bit small. But in hindsight, all the essentials are accounted for. I'm very busy, so the space of the tiny home makes it easy to clean. Multara has 4 other pods that the community uses. There is a storage pod where the residents can store their belongings due to the space of the tiny homes. There's also a laundry with a washing machine, a dryer, an ironing board and storage. The biggest pod at Multara is the community hub. This pod is where all the mentors stay and work unless they're helping another young person. Having the mentors close by is what I feel sets aside Multara from other independent living situations, as it's easy to get help from the mentors, whether it would be cooking, driving hours, or even just to have a chat. Although the point of independent living is to not rely on carers for support, the community hub is there when we need it. One of my favourite pods is the Hangout pod. This pod was originally a storage pod, but with the community, we brought up the fact that our pods are too small for more than 2 guests. And then from this conversation, the staff at Multara transformed the storage pod to a hangout space. The best thing about the transition from residential care to tiny homes for me was not having to stress about my current financial state, as Junction provided furniture, food, support, and support with bills, allowing me to learn home ownership skills without feeling unsupported or distressed. I'm currently learning how to budget my expenses and reach my financial goals, such as owning my own home, as well as other independent skills like paying rent and learning to cook, helping me grow as a person and a future adult.
I guess, you know, there was a gap in housing outcomes, and definitely between institutional care and residential care as well. So, and it's a big leap when you are coming out of institutional care into independent living. So we wanted to fill the gap, and with something that feels like a real home, but also gives young people the space and tools to grow into independent adulthood. We do this along with a state government-funded program, which is called Supported Independent Living Program, or otherwise known as SILS. Our youth mentors are on site during the day, not to supervise, but to walk alongside the young people. They're there to mentor, to check in, to help build the everyday skills that make a difference. Budgeting, cooking, navigating relationships, asking for help. It's learning by doing with a safety net underneath. So also I think what's important to show is that these pods are relocatable. So if we have to all of a sudden we want to expand this program, we can be off this site within 24 to 48 hours. So, yeah.
The layout of the campus makes it easy to bump into someone to have a chat or share a meal. I feel this is important as it builds a stronger relationship with your neighbours. It helps with loneliness because there's so many people there with similar experiences you can connect with and share a safe space with. Together with the other residents, we have community dinners where we build stronger relationships and discuss issues and resolve them. Such as putting laundry powder in the machine instead of in the liquids compartment. Being at Multara helps me prepare to properly live in my own home. It gives me a positive rental history and some savings to help when I move out. I'm planning on finishing Year 12 and building a stronger connection to my culture, as well as getting into a high division or maybe a career in basketball. If that doesn't go to plan, then acting and business are on my cards. Currently, I do dance with Uncle Moogie, a globally recognised Indigenous man in a dance group called Tarkunjeri. I'm also a cultural ambassador for my school, helping my school with its cultural awareness. Next year, I'll be learning how to play the didgeridoo, as well as learning the native language of the Kaurna people. My biggest plan is to be able to dedicate land to Aboriginal history.
Junction's approach is around housing support and place. We often say housing alone isn't enough, but the same is true the other way around. Support without stable housing rarely works either. This model intentionally brings both together. It offers young people a steady base, a place they can count on, and pairs that with daily trauma-responsive support. We have a one-team approach with a focus on advantage thinking. We also have worked with our state government from the Department of Child Protection and changed process to better match the young people that move into here. We've been pretty clear with the state government on the eligibility criteria. Again, we want to create a safe place for the young people who are keen to either remain engaged in education, seeking employment, volunteering, or just giving back. What's powerful is that the young people sign leases. They pay rent. They take responsibility for their homes. It's real-world tenancy with just enough scaffolding in place so they can ask questions, make mistakes, and learn in a safe way. And that's how sustainable independence is built. Not overnight, but step by step. Our broader vision is about building pathways, just not placing people. We want young people to leave Multara not only housed, but confident, capable, and hopeful about their future. This isn't a last resort, it's a launch pad. A model that can adapt, scale and evolve with the needs of young people.
Moving into Multara tiny homes has been one of the biggest steps in my journey to independence. It's close to my school and provides supportive, comfortable space to live due to the community. Each pod has everything I need, and the shared areas like the hangout pod and the community hub makes it easier to connect with my neighbours. The mentors are always there to help me, which has built my confidence and independence. Living here has taught me important life skills like budgeting, cooking, and cleaning. while giving me strong friendships and a sense of belonging. Multara has truly prepared me for my future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What we're going to do now is just warm up the discussion a little bit further with a few questions to get the panel discussing. Oh, sorry. I will do this with extra emphasis to make up for it. Oh, how terrible. I'm very pleased to welcome Corin, Moffatt and Avie from the Foyer Foundation. Imagine forgetting the Foyer Foundation. It'd be terrible.
Thank you, and we promise to try and keep this interesting. Let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this absolutely beautiful land that we're gathered here today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Avie and I wanted to share a little bit today about youth foyers. We want to talk about what they are, the role they play in the youth homelessness system, and importantly, how they help break the cycle of homelessness for young people. So just to say a little bit about what foyers are, they're for young people aged 16 to 24 years old who are either experiencing or are at risk of homelessness. What makes them different is they provide safe and stable housing for those young people for up to 2 years, but foyers are so much more than just a roof over a young person's head. They provide integrated education, employment and life skills support, help to form community connections, all under the one roof. And they're a really important part of the homelessness system and part of the solution that the Home Time crew were talking about earlier with needing 15,000 youth tenancies with support for young people who are currently locked out of a system that's just not designed for them. What makes foyers a little bit unique is that when a young person enters a foyer, they sign up to what's called the deal. And that's really an agreement between the young person and the foyer about the goals that the young person wants to achieve in their time at the foyer and the way the foyer staff and coaches are going to help that young person on their journey to independence. And all of that is delivered through the lens of what we call advantage thinking, which is really about seeing the young person for their talent and potential and what they can achieve rather than looking at them through the lens of their experience or being deficit-based in any way. And those things put together, we think, form a pretty special model of supporting young people who are experiencing homelessness. And in the spirit of advantage thinking, which really is about empowering young people and giving them a voice, I wanted to ask you, Avie, to tell us a little bit about what makes foyers unique and what are they, because it's always much better to hear from a young person than to hear from me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Corin. So I just want to start off with, so foyers are not just a place. They are a community where young people can thrive and look towards their future. It's where people get to feel safe in their own homes. And sometimes it's where people feel safe in their own homes for the first time. You work through your goals and be the better version of yourself. At my foyer, there are 98 apartments, 20 of which are located on the second level for parents and their babies. Upper ground, level 1, level 2, and level 3, full of apartments. Level 3 has penthouses, so they're slightly bigger than upper ground, and you also get your own couch. So I was lucky enough to get my own couch because I moved up to level 3. There are communal areas like Spark and Kindle, which is the communal kitchen and gathering place, and other spaces on residence levels. Community dinners are held every Sunday night, and they are a vibe, I'm telling you. There are 4 washing machines shared between 98 residents, so that can be a bit of a nightmare. We have movie nights in Spark and Kindle. We have an outside space used for barbecues in the summer and for community. At Foyer, I have been supported to build my own independence, not just to focus on the here and now or day-to-day things, but the future. My caseworker at Foyer helped me navigate systems so that I can achieve my goals like my study, career, and even things like getting my driver's license. I'm still working on that. They center you as a young person. They really value you, your life, your experience, and your story, and they want to see you go forward and thrive. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Avie. I think you can see in the way Avie talks about their experience at Foyer just how advantage thinking really comes to life in supporting young people to set goals and work towards achieving them. And that driver's license is so close, I know it. I think it's always good to see what a Foyer looks like a little bit, as well as talk about the model of a Foyer. And the reality is Foyers look very different across the country. They come in different shapes and sizes. Avie's one that they lived in was the largest at 98 beds. The smallest Foyer had 15 beds. Typically, they provide about 40 beds for young people in that 16 to 24 age bracket. That's Foyer. That's the Foyer that Avie lived in. Sometimes they're new build, sometimes they're refurbs of existing buildings. Some of them are high-rise, some of them are in more townhouse format. They support a range of young people with different experiences. Many have had experience of the care system. Many come to the Foyer with mental health challenges or are neurodiverse. 20% of young people living in Foyers are from First Nations. So there's a really diverse community living in different types of buildings. But there's things that make Foyers a Foyer. And they're some of the things that Avie described. Foyers all have a really welcoming and safe entrance where the young people come in, they have that instant feeling of being at home and have an instant connection to the staff, the coaches that are working there. When you walk into a Foyer, the office is open plan. It's really connected to the young people and the communal spaces that they live in. You know, the community kitchens where there's epic Sunday night dinners, the TV rooms, the games rooms, the communal spaces where young people can come together and form connections and build friendships that sustain them as they move towards independence. As well as those sort of shared spaces, there are individual apartments, and that's really important for the young person to be able to build those independent living skills, to be able to cook, clean, learn how to manage a tenancy. And then there's also communal outdoor spaces where young people can come together and do physical activity. There's often community gardens, there's barbecues, and they're a great place for young people to hang out. So, you know, what we see with Foyers is they're a real place-based solution. They look different in different places. They cater to different types of young people who are experiencing homelessness. But what binds them is that concept of advantage thinking and the deal that really helps young people work towards independence. And I'm going to come on to talk about some of the outcomes that youth Foyers help young people achieve. But first, I wanted to ask you, Avie, what difference Foyer has made to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So before Foyer, I was very unconfident, I was very shy, and I would not be public speaking like this today. And I didn't really know where to go in life. And I described myself as a shell of a person. And I was very quiet, I had 0 friends and no community. The thing that made the biggest difference to me at Foyer is all the supports in place, especially my case manager. She had been so helpful in supporting me to get to where I am today. She's just a great person, and I was so lucky to have her as case manager. She actually helped me get a $1,000 scholarship to fund driving lessons, and she helped me with my citizenship application. I'm now a citizen of Australia, and helped me just navigate systems. The resi workers do overnight shifts just in case there's a need for support, and they're genuinely the kindest, interesting people who will make you feel so listened to, and people describe them as your professional best friend. Resi workers make you feel more supported, learn how to manage stresses, and just like someone to have a great chat with. So also another thing is community and connection. Growing up in an environment where you can't be yourself to a safe, accepting environment, well, many Foyer residents come from not so great home life. And so, for example, going from a turbulent home life to a place like Foyer where events happen at 8:30 and the friends you have made congregate into a space called Spark and Kindle, and you do activities like art, and then you continue to sit there to yap until midnight. You can be yourself for once. And this represents the idea that Foyers aren't just accommodation. They're so much more than that. Lastly, opportunities. I was really trying for things and I got recognized for my effort due to the strengths-based approach Foyer embodies. When I left Foyer, one of the volunteering coordinators told me I'd be missed because I was like part of the furniture. Foyer has connections with local community, like the Y down the road. From Foyer offered a free barista course, so I got to learn how to make coffees. Free tickets to the ballet, and through that, experiencing my first ballet performance, and it was unforgettable. Youth Makers Market in the city of Vincent last year, I got to host a stall and learn how to bake the best cookies. There were flyers in the Foyer lobby where I was approached to do a 5-day phlebotomy course, and so I gained valuable life experience. And then, as a side gig, I learnt Auslan at TAFE, and I also had the opportunity to liaise with North Metro TAFE and the former SSO and person who ran Foyer events to get a 5-week Auslan course held at TAFE. And these are just some of the countless opportunities I was given. That's just not even it. Not only did I have these opportunities, I got to experiment with who I am, find people who accepted me for me. I built up my confidence and personality living at Foyer, and I was a completely different person when I left. I really grew into myself. They're not just a place to live, it was my home, and I made it my own.
Thanks, Avie. I think you can see that Avie's really made the most of their time living at Foyer, Oxford, and Avie's got a remarkable amount of achievement, and they should be very proud of that. And what's great about Foyers is we see young people across the country achieve the sorts of outcomes that Avie's described to you today. We know this because every Foyer across the country collects data against a national outcomes framework and shares that with the Foyer Foundation. So we can track how young people are coming into a Foyer and exiting a Foyer. And what we're really thrilled to see as that data set emerges is that 80% of young people that are leaving Foyers are exiting into safe and stable accommodation. And 80% of young people that are leaving Foyers are doing so in either education and or employment. And we think that's a remarkable demonstration of the pathway to independence that Foyers put young people on. But more importantly than that, or just as importantly as that, and Avie talked about some of this, it builds connection, it builds independence, it builds life skills. So young people emerge more confident to get the healthcare they need, more confident to know how to apply for a house for rent. And I think this one really delights me. 87% of young people leave Foyers believing that they can achieve their long-term goals. That always gives me tingles when I look at that number, because I think it just is a great demonstration of why Foyers work. And because they work, it's why we're seeing more and more communities across the country wanting a Foyer as part of the solution to youth homelessness. We work with over 70 organisations across the country as part of Foyer Invest, which is a network of service providers, community housing providers and others committed to growing the number of Foyers in Australia to 50 by 2030. We have 16 today, and we're well on our way to 50 with 35 more, a total of 35 in the pipeline. So come and talk to us if you want to know more about Foyers. I'm sure you can see from what Avie shared today that they're a great solution to youth homelessness. Thank you.
Now, is there anyone else on the panel that I forgot? So sorry about that. I'm just going to try and warm it up with a few questions just to draw out some of the points that I certainly heard. I think the portrait of Foyers and those most magnificent tiny homes against the portrait of children living in public housing with their families, being evicted to heaven knows what. So these two portraits, I guess one of the reflections I have is just on how many times when you were talking about housing choices, that the words like community, feeling those connections, relationships, place-based, building community through food, like the vivid images of people sitting and sharing food. And it was really striking to me about the design of spaces that meant that these kinds of gatherings could happen. And I don't know if we've got any architects in the room, but the kind of magic that comes from people who can look at a space where there's nothing yet and listen to what people need and then help to design something that really solves not just the need for a roof over your head, but to allow for such an enriched experience of community. So let's just go to supply for a minute. To anyone on the panel, having heard about the 15,000 homes target in the national campaign, what do we need to scale up the housing and support response to young people? What would it take?
Yeah, so I think firstly we need to increase youth allowance, the unreasonable to live at home rate, to at least the rate of job seeker, because right now when housing providers are trying to get funding to build youth-specific housing, they're applying in the same funding rounds as general housing. So you need a higher subsidy to build housing for young people because they pay less rent. So when you're trying to put a bid in for youth-specific housing and your bid is put up against someone who doesn't need a subsidy at all or needs a much lower subsidy, your bid is almost never selected. And then in terms of like architecturally, what can we do? How can we create supply quickly? Because 15,000 tenancies is a lot. Well, it's not enough, but to kind of create that instantly is a lot. And I think we need to be creative. I read an article in the news yesterday that I thought was really interesting. Something that they're doing in Sydney is they're turning abandoned offices into housing, and they're turning the centre of the office into community spaces, into gyms, and into like art spaces and shared spaces. And I think repurposing current buildings in creative ways, and we have so many empty houses, and I wonder if there's a way to use government funding to turn those empty houses into youth housing, you know, multi-bedroom homes into share houses for young people where you have a lead tenant and you have other residents. Because on youth allowance, you can't afford to rent a room, you can't afford to rent anything, so you end up on the street, or you end up in these situations where someone is taking advantage of you, and that's not an appropriate response for our young people, and we need to do better.
Go for it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Great answer. And I'm sure the community housing providers in the room are welcoming the depth of your understanding about the challenges in delivering homes, especially when the subsidies just aren't quite right. So thank you for expressing that so clearly for those people in the room that aren't directly involved in community housing provision.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add what Atlas said. I 100% agree that fixing the youth allowance rate and the youth housing penalty that disincentivises community housing providers from building youth housing is a fundamental starting point. But I think the thing we really need on top of that is an investment mindset. And what I mean by that is there are 40,000 young people that experience homelessness every year. That is 40,000 young people who can be productive, contributing members of society in a country that is constantly talking about productivity and skill shortages. And yet we see investing in fixing that problem as a burden, whereas actually when we see that as an opportunity to invest in the future of young people, we know from the data that it pays governments back. So we know with youth foyers that for every $1 spent on a youth foyer, governments get $6 in return, because young people go on to study and work and, you know, aren't in the justice system, aren't using the health system in the same way. And I think, you know, governments too often see solving the problem of youth homelessness as a cost rather than actually as a really great investment in young people who have a tremendous amount to give if they just get given the chance.
And I mean, we heard that so deeply expressed by Blake, you know, talking so much about what he wants to give, you know, given the chance. So let's think more about that mindset and the difference that mindset makes to an awful lot of things. So did anyone else want to answer that question at all? I guess on the other side of it, we heard about a supply of homes that already exist in the form of public housing. This deep dive in terms of eviction data, I think that's so important to a healthy system, that we understand the drivers of evictions and do everything we can through support, but also structurally to stop it. I just would like to ask Kate, what would a child's rights approach look like to the prevention of evictions from public housing? And what would it take to get us to a better kind of set of arrangements that would see young people and children always land with a home rather than eviction to homelessness?
Yeah, I think looking at the data from Western Australia, and also there's quite a bit of research across the whole of Australia, I think within public housing systems, housing authorities do take some consideration of children into account, in that families with children are more likely to be referred to services for supports, and more likely to be perhaps have some delays before evictions. But we don't have any clear inclusion of a child's rights approach within public housing. And what that would mean is that children's rights were clearly required as a consideration by a housing manager. And so if there were problems within a tenancy, a children's rights approach would mean that they were actively looking at, well, what are the children in this tenancy? What are their needs? How are they impacted by this situation? And how would their lives be impacted by eviction? And those are the considerations that are not happening at the moment. And I think a child's rights approach would mean that a recognition that as a policy position, it is not an appropriate policy position for our state governments to be evicting children to homelessness. It's not in the public interest for that to happen. And that can be avoided by much better integration of housing with supports.
Thank you. And it's just interesting to hear you say it starts with a policy position. We are not going to do this. If there's an issue, we're going to do something different than a pathway to eviction. But then, of course, that needs to be underpinned by investment in the kinds of support that can help families sustain their tenancies, or if for whatever reason that tenancy can't be sustained, to find something else that is a fantastic alternative that meets their needs. I've got a question that wasn't kind of on the prompt list, but I just wonder what the panel thinks about what we need to do to embed more lived experience in service delivery, in housing provision and in advocacy. What would it take? What supports this, given its power and potential? Anyone can answer.
Well, at Junction, we actually have a lived experience community advisory team. LACAT, we refer to them as, and we have representatives we have tenants on there, we have foster carers on there, young people are on there as well. It might be better if we've got Lucy here, who's our lived experience lead. She might want to answer that, but I think the first step is actually making sure that the lived experience people have a voice and their voice is listened to. So we work really closely with our LACAT team, so any changes to policy, procedures, what we're designing, what we're building, they're part of those discussions and consultation as well. We've just done some training on customer service standards, and they help us build that training as well. So, yeah.
Please, go for it.
I'll just jump in here. I think it's important to define what we mean when we say lived experience. If we're talking about a lived experience advisor, a lived experience advocate, lived experience expert, carer advisor, because they all mean different things and they all require different things. Someone with lived experience and with living experience requires different support. And it's a very new space, and there isn't really a consensus because everyone's experience is so different and everyone's needs are so different. Like, I have a really complex trauma history, but someone else who has a similar complex trauma history will be triggered by different things and will need different things in the space. And sometimes our needs will conflict. Sometimes I need things to be quiet and dark, and sometimes dark and quiet is upsetting for someone else in the same space who's doing the same work that I'm doing. So it's about having conversations and making compromise and listening to understand and not to respond. And also when you're working with lived experience, it's not just about their story, it's not just about what happened to you, it's about what did you learn from what happened? How do you understand the system in ways that I could never possibly understand the system because I only see it from up here, and you've gone all the way through and come out, and now you're up here with me looking down. So we as lived experience experts have a different perspective than people who have only ever worked in services.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to say something?
I'd love to. I think you need three things, and I base that off a lot of work we've done to really embed lived experience at the Foyer Foundation. I think you need a really genuine commitment to doing it. You can't just say you're going to do it or pretend you're going to do it because you think that's what people want. I think you need a very genuine commitment. You need to be prepared to offer a lot of support, support to create the safe space, support to understand the unique needs of each young person, support to develop their skills so that they come into a space feeling empowered. And then the third thing I think you need is funding. If you really value it, you pay for it. At the Foyer Foundation, all the young people that work with us, we remunerate them for their time, and that requires funding. And so, we actively seek funding to enable us to do that because I think that's the way you show that you truly value lived experience.
Okay. And we'll come back down to you. Yep. We'll just go with Kate and then I'll come back down the end.
I think it also requires institutional and organisational commitment to ongoing reform. So within public housing in Western Australia, there is no tenant reference committee, there is no feedback loop for tenant voices, and no consultation for policy reviews, either with tenants or community agencies. So no pathways for tenant advocates to provide feedback or homelessness services to provide feedback on policy settings. And so, the public sector Commission's agency capability review of the Department of Communities found that there wasn't a management structure that was suitable for driving reform, and that there were barriers to reform and culturally at many levels of the agency. And so I think those are things that need to be profoundly addressed for lived experience voices to be able to drive the change we need.
Lisa?
Yeah, I was just going to support you need funding because, like any expert, you pay for the expertise, you pay for the advice, and you'll pay for the assistance. So that has to be foremost when you start bringing people into the area of lived experience and assisting you. But the one thing that I've learned is you have to be prepared to be told that you're wrong, that you're looking at it all wrong. And quite obviously, I'm not 16, I'm not 18, I'm not 20. And you have to listen and go, absolutely, we can change, we can adapt, and we can move forward looking at things through that different lens. We have the voice of lived experience on my board, which has been absolutely invaluable, especially when it comes into that policy space and talking about strategy. So if you're interested, really think about why you're interested, but reach out to people that are already doing it.
Did anyone else want to say something?
Yeah. So there's something that I've been working with recently from connections at the Multara Tiny Homes. There was a program called Create Foundation, which works on lived experience. They go support people from 14 to 25, I believe it was, and then they get people with lived experience and they help as a job. They support them paying them a decent amount of money, $35 to $45, I'm pretty sure, per hour, and then they really work around you. Again, I don't know that much because I've only just started working with them, but
No, thank you. Did anyone else?
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
My previous history with housing has been in the adult space, and since we are now just specific to youth housing and I work with great lived experience advisors, it's becoming more and more obvious that if you start housing young people, there are certain complex issues that you see in adult housing that you can actually start to avoid if you're housing people when they're younger. And a lot of those issues will not be there by the time they're moving into adulthood and adult housing. There is such value in listening and getting young people into housing to assist at that later stage.
It's a fantastic point. And Avie, did you want to say a few
I
things?
think there's also some value in obviously going towards funding, which creates more lived experience voices, but also creating the idea of the value to value the lived experiencing voices as the first step will create change to having more lived experience voices, because when you get more lived experience voices, people start to realise the value that lived experience voices actually hold, and people will, want more lived experience voices. Yeah.
Look, I really appreciate that conversation. I'm going to have a go at summarising it because I think it holds so many important aspects of methodology, what to do, how to do it. But I want you also to be thinking about your questions, because the opportunity to ask questions is coming right up. From that discussion, I think everyone on the panel had something to say. It's so deeply felt, it's so deeply a commitment. And that's what it really started with, from what I could hear, that organisations have to decide they are committed to embedding lived experience in the ways in which they work. It's like an organisational position that you take. And earlier in the discussion there was that concept of structuring it up around advisory groups and other ways to give these efforts structural support. And if you think about buildings and how they need structure and what the engineers offer by way of foundations that can hold up the weight and the bearing of the building downwards, we need enough structure around these efforts to kind of give it the support, the deep support that it really does need, but it also gives it status because we structure it into the very way in which we operate our organisations. I was really struck by the critical importance of individualised support and understanding each person and their individual needs to support their participation, and then really practical things like it has to be funded, it needs a resource allocation. It's possibly driven by, but also will drive standards and quality. And there are organisations out there such as these, and also the organisation Create, which I think is an amazing organisation, who we can reach for to kind of learn the path that they've followed and learn as much as we can from what they do and how they do it. The other interesting point was around lived experience as part of governance. It's true of Q Shelter as well, and it does need our intentionality and our support so that people have a great experience and they're better, they're more engaged and participating, they're making real contributions, not token contributions to how organisations lead and follow and learn and make a difference. So in short, I just take away from it, it has to be something deeply valued to set an organisation on a pathway to really achieve the level of care and attention that this most important thing needs. And there probably isn't any effort that was represented today by way of initiatives that hasn't been somewhat and much better driven by the fact that lived experience was involved. And I think that the decision makers, the members of parliament, all of the people who influence housing and its delivery have to have that direct relationship to also have their hearts and minds transformed. Now I'm going to open up to you. In terms of the questions, what we're going to do, we're going to invite people to ask a question. You just simply have to raise your hand and I'm going to look and direct where we go, and I'm going to try and get to as many people as possible. And to that end, it would be great if people could keep their questions quite short and maybe not so much comments, but a really good question. You can see the wonderful richness that comes from this panel. So let's see what else they can tell us that we can learn from. We've got roving microphones, which we'll bring to you, and let's open it up. Has anybody got a question? Here? And then I'll come over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's working? Yep. Thank you. My name's Elise. I work for Mission Australia. Thank you so much to the panel today. I'm working in collaboration with Indigo Junction and Vinnie's WA. Also, we're very fortunate with our Youth Affairs Council in WA have a youth homeless advisory council with young people with lived experience. And they echo very much, Atlas, what you have talked about, which is around that. I think the issue we have with youth allowance is that there is a lot of blame of young people as to why you're homeless. So I'm just wondering if there's any strategies around, and obviously engaging with young people with more lived experience and speaking directly to ministers, but I think that's the block of why we're not getting that. And the second point is really around housing first for young people. So really appreciate the models we've had today, but one of the things and the gaps that we have is that there's still criteria for young people, and our crisis system is blocked up because the leap from crisis to a youth foyer is huge for some young people. So I'm just wondering around any work happening in Housing First for Youth.
Thank you. Anyone like to answer that?
I want to address the first half of the question first. So in terms of accessing UTLA or the unreasonable to live at home allowance, it's a really difficult process, one that social services workers aren't all across, and you'll get a different answer depending on the service worker that you get. You often need to give them permission to talk to your parents, who for young people are typically their abusers. And this is a really prejudiced system. The system is not wired to believe young people who are victim survivors of abuse. And our lived experience team from MCM are working with DFFH to try and rewrite some of those internal policies and change the way that they assess eligibility for ULA. And then the Home Time campaign is advocating for an increase in ULA to the same rate as job seeker to kind of level out some of those access issues. In terms of the housing first question, we don't do housing first in Australia. We talk about it a lot, but it's simply not something that we do. We have talked about it for years, and we continue to talk about how it's something that we should move towards, but I don't think Australia is ready for it. I don't think that it's going to be something that the government will fund anytime in the foreseeable future.
We're putting in a pre-budget submission to WA first, co-designed with young people, so look out.
I look forward to it.
Thank you for that. We've got another question over here. Here comes a microphone.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Hello, you can hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Eunice Go. I'm actually from New South Wales. Kate, I think your research study is very revealing. I only just heard about it when you spoke, the difference. Even 15% eviction in New South Wales is too much, let alone 50%. So my question to you is, how do we, I guess the answer I know by coming here, is how do we cross-pollinate so that the youth of Australia, not one particular state doing better than the other. So what would you recommend to us? There's so many of us here, let alone, the other 800 outside. So how do we can set a motion? So that's one question. Secondly, Alice, I'm so impressed with you for what you have just shared with us. But I want to tell you something really positive happening in New South Wales about Housing First. For the first time in the New South Wales strategy for homelessness from 2025 to 2035 have acknowledged Housing First works. And therefore, our Minister for Housing, who also Minister for Youth, is putting in an extraordinary amount of money, 5.5 billion. So we are hopeful, and we will hold government to account, on Housing First.
Did anybody want to say something to that? Did you?
It would be excellent if the Minister was to hear how shocked and appalled the Ahuri conference was about those statistics, because it's too easy for the housing ministers to feel that this is an issue that the community is not concerned about.
And I mean, maybe we can take an action as well. The peak bodies might write, because the housing ministers do meet, and wouldn't it be interesting to put to them the prospect of a protocol that always work to prevent homelessness when there's a troubled tenancy? We'll talk more about that. Andy.
You could all probably hear me anyway, can't you? Thank you. This is a Foyer question. Andy Dennis from Anglicare NT, working really hard to produce a Foyer in Alice Springs, the red dot right in the middle there that no one else is around. Getting over the hurdle of capital funding and land, probably the easy part. What sort of subsidy is required to run a Foyer? Does Foyer have a per head, sort of number?
Yeah, so we talk about, on average, a 40-bed foyer, noting that some are bigger, some are smaller. A 40-bed foyer requires about $2 million a year to run. To build, they generally cost about $20 million, but that can be much higher in remote communities and much lower where there's an opportunity to refurbish. About $50,000 per head, noting that a young person will stay there for up to 2 years. One of the things I'd make as a comment, just building on what you were saying, I think it's fantastic that the federal government has put so much capital money on the table for a whole range of youth housing solutions, and we need a whole range of youth housing solutions, including Foyers. But I think one of the biggest missed opportunities in that really significant capital funding commitment was not connecting it up to support. Because, you talk to any young person and they will say they need some form of support. Some people need more, some people need less, but young people need support to navigate the path to independence. And you can't access capital funding if you don't have support dollars, and you can't get support dollars if you don't have capital funding dollars. And I think that's a real shame in the way the sort of response is being designed.
Thank you for that. Now, there's a lady in blue right down the back, and then we'll go to the lady in green. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone on the panel. I come from a health background, and just listening to all of you now and all of these incredible initiatives, I just wonder, I've worked in health for 35 years and I'm here representing an organisation called One Bridge, and we work with young people, in fact anyone who is at risk of homelessness or is homeless. So we do outreach, we're on the streets, we're in social housing, all sorts of environments. What I haven't heard today very much is everyone's talking about infrastructure and the supports needed, but I've never heard health mentioned. And a lot of our work is really to support people around mental health, navigating systems, which is really, really difficult for anybody, let alone young people, drug and alcohol, all sorts of issues that we see, as well as just access. All of us here in this room will be very aware that you can't even see a GP these days under $100. So a lot of people are choosing food over seeing a doctor. So I just wondered if any of the initiatives, if I can ask, have included a health element or health arm to your initiatives.
Would anyone like to answer?
So I'm just speaking from the tiny homes perspective. So with the mentors there, they on board with helping you, like with GPs, with dentists, even like helping you be able to not only learn how to book it yourself, but also how to, like I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they can support you funding wise if it's required. But the people there, they're on board with helping the young people develop the skills of being able to see these these healthcare things. You want to speak?
Yeah, and it's definitely the mentor's role is about upskilling the young people in making those connections with GPs, dentists, if it's mental health plans with GPs, also NDIS as well. Because some of the young people just don't know where to start. So definitely that's the role of mentors to help with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Melbourne City Mission has a youth housing initiative, which is part of the housing that I provide, which is 3 different types of housing, which allow young people that are lucky enough to access the housing to have therapeutic workers and wraparound support given to them that certainly helps them get to the point of perhaps understanding they do need support for mental health issues or for AOD issues that are clearly present, but they need to get to the point of reaching out for that support. So the wraparound support that is offered through the YHI program is certainly leading the young people towards improving all aspects of their lives, including sustaining tenancies and everything that comes with that, but also most importantly, their health. Mental health, physical health, and for the time that they spend in the houses, it's based on housing first principles, but isn't true housing first. So I'm just supporting what Atlas said before. So yeah, we are very much aware of that, and those supports are there around those young people in those properties to hopefully get them to where they need to be.
Thank you. Avie?
So I speak from a Foyer perspective, but with my experience of Foyer, you have your residential youth workers or resi workers, and they support young people 8 p.m. to 8 a.m, I think, and they support young people in times of crisis when any additional supports may be needed, may be required, and I believe it comes from a trauma-informed, strengths-based approach where young people are supported through means of what's in their best interest. And young people will obviously be supported by their case managers to access GPs or access whatever they may need. And I think that addresses the health element as well as the mental health element of the question.
Thank you very much. Now we had another question here, and then we've probably got time for one more after that.
This is for Junction. So my name's Famie Williams. I'm from New South Wales, and I was just really impressed by the, little village that you've developed there. But I was curious as to how did you overcome your local challenges around planning, and very curious just for some context around that.
I think the most important thing was early engagement with key stakeholders, so local council, the CEO and myself. We went out door knocking with the neighbours, spoke to them about the campus, what was going to be put on site. So the early engagement was really, really important, and also just, it's also important to talk about, there's risk, but this is what we're putting in place to minimise the risk. I'd have to say the local residents, which are across the road, they have been looking at an empty piece of land for the last 8 years. So they were just super pleased to something going on that piece of land. But we remain committed to be communicating with them as well. So from the site to the neighbours, we've got really good relationships with them. We also brought the local SA Police community team as well to come out, and so they have a bit of a relationship now with the young people, but also the staff that's on site. And the other key thing was the land is state government land, so really talking to state government partners about the site, the campus, the purpose. So, yeah.
Thank you. And down the back here, is there a microphone?
I might stand up because Brother Boy's real tall and I'm short. Stacey from Aboriginal Community Housing. Before I ask my question, I just really want to acknowledge Avie, Blake and Atlas for coming up here today and sharing your journey with us. I hope that you guys are super proud of yourselves for doing that, because there's about 100 odd people in this room, and I know how nerve-wracking it can be to kind of have this. Super proud of what you guys have achieved so far, and thank you sincerely for sharing your journey to date. It is one that unfortunately we hear too often, but at the same time, the positivity that's come out of it generally warms my heart. And my question is actually for you three. Throughout all your presentations, you all talked about feeling safe and safety. So my question is, what does that look like, or what is that for you?
Safety for me is having a positive environment with everyone around you. So whether it be the mentors, the neighbours, being able to comfortably talk to them, so that way you can feel supported and safe in because that environment you're living there. You want people to be you want to be happy living there. So having a supportive and just having a supportive environment, really, yeah. It's just that's what makes me feel safe, and then most of all of the residents there, yeah.
Avie, and then we'll go down to Atlas.
I'd say the same, having supportive people who want to get to know you, are curious about you, want to see you thrive, want to see you grow, want to see you develop into and grow into yourself is really all that you can ask for in a safe, supportive, caring environment that people, young people, need.
And Atlas?
I think for me, safety isn't so much about the where, but the who. So for me, my first experience of safety was with a youth worker, and I'd grown up in such intense violence that it made me really anxious. She was weirdly nice to me, and I was like, what do you want from me? Why are you doing this? And it took me a really long time to trust her, but I still, it's been years now, but I still reference that feeling that I got with her whenever I have new relationships with people, whenever I'm in new spaces, because that was the first time I ever felt safe. So when I'm trying to decide if I'm in a good place, if this relationship with a person is okay, I kind of decide whether this is a feeling I would have had with her. So that's, we've all talked about support, and that's what support does. So safety for me is support.
Thank you very much. I do apologise to anyone else with a question that we didn't get around to. I'd encourage you all to find one another during the half-hour break we're about to have, and perhaps keep the conversation going. A sincere thank you to the presenters. Let's give them another round of applause just out of such appreciation. And thanks to all of you too. It's a big group of people. It feels great to be in a room with people who share a commitment to trying to make things better in the future than they are right now. It's time to have afternoon tea, so please enjoy that. It's out in the exhibition precinct. And at 4 p.m, the final plenary session will commence in the theatre. Thanks, everybody.